Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting the day 2 of this All India Management Association, All Kerala Management Association Summit and the annual National Convention for Kerala Management Association in its 60th year. May I request all of you to please occupy your seats quickly? This is day 2. So how many of you were here yesterday? Can I have a show of hands? Okay, that's good. But I think there are some who were not here yesterday. So I'm sure you can check with those who were here yesterday. You missed a lot. It was a power-packed day, and the sessions were such that it is going to be a regret that you were not here yesterday to listen to them. Day 2 is equally power-packed. We have a series of speakers who are authorities in their own field and domain, and they're going to be sharing their knowledge and talent with all of us. So a few basic meeting etiquettes. Those who were here yesterday know about it, but let me repeat it. Everyone is requested to please turn the ringer off on their mobile phones and all devices which ring. Please avoid exiting or entering the hall while the session is going on. Do not move about when the sessions are on as a basic etiquette to the speaker. Each session is timed. You would have got the agenda. So during the session, which will be between 40 minutes to 60 minutes, is when we request you to be seated, enjoy the session, learn from it. The networking we prefer if it is done during the break and not during the session. Kerala Management Association has been conducting annual conventions, and each has been very well received, very popular. The same auditorium has been packed as it was yesterday, and it is getting filled up even today. But today, this year's convention is a historic one. For one, this is the first time that all the management associations of Kerala, and there are 9 of them that are coming together under the aegis of their parent body, the All India Management Association, and conducting a summit. The second reason why it is historic is for the range of speakers and the depth of their knowledge. Yesterday, we had a talk by the founder of infinitism, Mahatria Ra. And he himself said this is the first time that he is speaking in Kerala. He's a person who's traveled the globe, whose videos are viral. And he said this is the first time he's coming here. It has happened because of the painstaking efforts and the perseverance taken by the organizing team of this year's convention. For those of you who were not here yesterday, we've prepared a small snippet. We have a video to show you, which will give you a glimpse into Mahatria Ra, his teachings, his life, and a bit of what he told us yesterday. He said he spoke for a long time. He completed his discourse was about 45 minutes. It was a very intense session, rightly termed a transformational session. And he spoke to us on how it is important to be healthy, wealthy, lively, blissful, spiritual. And he told us how we can do all of this. And amongst the very interesting things he said, one was that it's not planting a seed that is so important, but preparing the soil for it. So here is a very short video on Mahatria Ra to start the day with.
Seldom in life comes a soul who lives for others. Expanding, evolving, transforming human consciousness far beyond perceived limitations. A true believer in the power of human potential.
The glory of being born as a human being is that I can be anything till the last moment, and I can still be something else from this moment of my life. One of the laws of transformation is when source and object meet with intensity, it creates instant transformation. Always go into a relationship so that you can make others happy. You are not able to understand God is not ignorance. You think you can understand God, that is ignorance. Faith is not absence of intelligence. Faith is the crescendo of intelligence. It's the crowning glory of intelligence.
Mahatriya is transforming lives regardless of age, social strata, and geographical boundaries. A pathbreaker, endowed with a deep connectivity to existence and enormous spiritual strength, teaching millions to embrace abundance. Abundance in health, abundance in wealth, abundance in love, abundance in bliss, abundance in spiritual connect. His unique method of blending spiritual seeking with materialistic ambition is changing the way spirituality is experienced. Infinityism, the path defined by Mahatriya, is bringing about a dawn of human consciousness through the science of spirituality. The one whose silence speaks and in whose presence silence is. Words do not describe everything, and words cannot describe everyone. It has to be experienced.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting the first plenary session on day 2 for a theme which is centered around disruptive world. Nothing could be more appropriate than starting our day with a plenary session which has 2 speakers, each specializing in the latest of technologies. One would be speaking to us on artificial intelligence and the second on robotics. It's my pleasure to introduce the speakers to you. Let me start with Mr. Viju Chako, who is also my colleague at Tata Consultancy Services, where he is the lead architect, and his focus areas are artificial intelligence and IoT, or Internet of Things. Mr. Viju Chako's responsibilities include envisioning cutting-edge solutions for customer applications and guiding his team on the latest technology advancement. He spends his time on other digital technology areas also, including cloud, blockchain, big data and analytics, quantum computing, wearable computing, functional programming, and so on. It's a long list. Mr. Viju Chako has close to 20 years of software industry experience, covering the entire gamut of software delivery. He's also a part of the curriculum committee for the Masters of Computer Application program under the newly formed Kerala Technical University. Mr. Viju Chako has a postgraduate degree in computer applications. At TCS and with clients, he is, and I can vouch for this, the go-to man if you want to know about the latest in technology. He's also very passionate about imparting his knowledge to youngsters, conducts many programs at various academic institutions. Mr. Viju Chako is known for his insightful sessions where he unravels the complexities of technology, his articulate presentation to varied audience. So I'm sure it is going to be a great start when we listen to him demystifying artificial intelligence. May I request you to please come on stage? The next speaker for the first session is with Mr. T. Jayakrishnan. He's the founder and CEO of Asimov Robotics. where he heads the operations and is also responsible for the conceptualization, research, and development of the new interactive social service robot ISRA, that is Intelligent Service Robot Assistant. This has capabilities of autonomous mobile manipulation as well as human interaction through speech and gesture recognition. I'm sure we are waiting to know more about this, and we are going to be fascinated when we get to know a little more on what it actually does. Additionally, Mr. T. Jayakrishnan is involved in research and development of a highly rugged and weather-sealed robotic system for defense and space applications. He has a long history of inventions. He has about 20 years of industry experience, including embedded system design and software development for instrumentation, power control, processor design, SDK design, video compression, and robotics. He started his career as an instrumentation engineer. He personally developed a unique and successful instrument for hearing and vision sensitivity graphing. At Cochin University, he designed and developed a hexapod, that is a six-legged robot, and a unique tripod autonomous wall climbing robot. At Drentel Technologies, he was responsible for development of a microprocessor-based inverter and status monitoring system for uninterrupted power supplies. Prior to that, he was Director India of Energid Technologies, and there he set up a new engineering division that provided software and hardware services for robotics and machine vision. So ladies and gentlemen, he is an inventor and a disruptor himself. Mr. Jayakrishnan, may I request you to please come on stage? May I request the President of KMA, Mr. Vivek Krishna Govind, Senior Vice President, and the Chairman of the Convention Committee, Mr. Dinesh Sampi, and Honorary Secretary, Mr. Madhav Chandran, to please come on stage and welcome the panel. Over to the speakers. May I request Mr. Vijay Chakko to please start?
Good morning, all. Good morning, all. So I'm just going to, can you present the slide, please? Thank you. So my topic for today is, demystifying artificial intelligence. So before I get into my presentation, let me take a minute to thank KMA for giving me an opportunity to present before such an august audience. Without wasting a lot of time, let me get into the schedule for today. And this is at a very high level. This is what I plan to cover today. It would start with the very quick background and introduction. Probably we all heard a lot about the application and the disruption what AI and robotics could be bringing in most of the sessions yesterday. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. I'll just take a moment after the background setting on to talk a bit on why AI is so relevant now at this time. Because AI is a term which coined in 1956, way before. It's like 70 years almost. The term got coined, right? So I'll talk about why it is so relevant at this point of time, and then get into a little bit of the approaches what we employ within AI, and then look at little applications around it. So these are few areas which we are all familiar with. Or AI touching our lives in our day-to-day life. Like we all know, when we use Gmail, we see multiple categories. Nowadays, the spam mails don't bother us too much because there is a folder separately for spam, and every now and then you could actually go and clean that spam separately. And behind the scene, it's an AI piece or an AI model which looks at filtering your spam. The Google search, if you look at many a times we find like based on who is searching, the most relevant information is served to that. Again, it's an application of AI. The vehicle, the driverless vehicle, right? You might be reading in news around it, like AI. There are a lot of places where like AI directly or indirectly playing its role. To understand what AI is, first let's look at the attributes of human intelligence. We all know like what is human intelligence, but then we may not have like really thought through like what is human intelligence or different aspects of human intelligence. So it would probably start with the knowledge. Yesterday, like in our transformation session, Maitreya said that you don't like download all the information from here, like it will be an information overload for you. That's the repository of information what we have, the knowledge what we have, right? So that is definitely part of our intelligence, one of the attribute of intelligence, and that's the knowledge part. Apart from the knowledge part, we always have the ability to learn new things, right? The learning process, and then like use our knowledge in an effective manner. We saw like Dr. Mohandas, Padmasri Mohandas' presentation, like information was flowing, like the application of knowledge was like very very fluent there, right? So that's the learning and the application. Apart from this, the knowledge what we have, one of the greatest attribute of human intelligence is that we can infer out things even without like looking at the external world for like facts or figures. With the kind of knowledge what we have, like probably from two different domains, we will be able to like correlate those two domains and kind of come up with inferences which connects these two domains. So that's the ability for us to infer, right? So these are a few of the attributes of human intelligence, and let's see like how it would look like when it comes to artificial intelligence. And the intent of this is not to say, look, knowledge in human beings is one-to-one equated to like a knowledge representation in the world of AI. But at a very high level, at a 50,000 feet altitude, this is how the mapping would look like. The knowledge of human beings, there is like equivalent systems in the IT space which are built, or a lot of work is happening in that area in order to simulate the knowledge systems. Apart from that, the learning process, the application process, and the inference process, that could at a very high level mapped into this concept called machine learning. And today's discussion, rest of the presentation, I would be possibly like trying to cover the different aspects of machine learning. Before continuing, I just wanted to touch upon just two terms which very often comes in this field. It's called the weak AI versus the strong AI. Many times when we hear AI, we kind of correlate to kind of machines taking over the human beings, and like we would have seen like a lot of English movies where that's kind of articulated well, like robots taking over human beings, and like war between humans and robots, so humans and machines. That field where a system which is intelligent to the human level or more is generally termed as the strong AI, or another term which is used is artificial general intelligence. And there are systems which are subhuman, which are lesser intelligent than human. When I say lesser intelligent than human, what I mean is it could be intelligent in a very specific kind of activity for a specific kind of business application. Say, for example, like predicting weather. So that system is good or intelligent to predict the weather, but not like in anything else, right? Whereas in human being, we can actually go across board, like across domains and make inference and apply our intelligence. Whereas a weak AI system will be like specialized in only one field. And again, I'll be kind of focusing more on the weak AI side, and which is a reality now. Whereas the strong AI is there are a lot of talks and a lot of discussions around strong AI that it could take over or it could pick up very soon in the coming future. With that, let's see like why AI is so relevant at this time. The first part of this presentation, the top hand right side of this slide, you could see a graph. There is no too much info there. It just depicts how the cost of computing have come down over years, and the cost of computing and storage, right? When I started my career, or the first time when I saw a computer, that computer was didn't have a hard disk. It used to run on a floppy disk. I don't know the kids who are sitting behind. You might have to go to a museum to probably see a floppy disk. And nowadays, it's not available. But probably the entrepreneurs and the older generation who is sitting in front might have seen a floppy disk, and the computers were like way dumb than even our mobile phones today. What we have, right? The processing speed was like 6 megahertz. 6 megahertz. It is M. It's not gigahertz. Today, most of us use mobile phones which are like more than like 1 gigahertz processing speed, right? The processor speed. Whereas it's a matter of like 20-25 years. There is tremendous increase in the way the processing power have increased, the storage have increased, and it is still like continuing to grow, even though the traditional computers, the way the traditional computers develop might like cease in next like 5 or 10 years, right? The electronic computers, the space could be like taken over by computers which leverage subatomic particles. It's called quantum computing. You might have heard of it. Anyway, computing has increased to the extent where like most of the business problems or the data what we collect today could be processed within a reasonable amount of time. So when I say the data, again, the volume of data also have increased. When I started the way back in like 83 times, in order to boot a system, we just needed 3 files, right? The 3 files would come in a floppy disk. And once you boot the system, it is all ready for you to work on it. Like you can run your program, you can run your word processing, you can run your Excel kind of software on it, you can run your business application on top of it. The storage was like 64 KB. The floppy disk used to have only 64 KB. Today, probably any file, we take, it could run to a couple of MBs. We never bother like what's the size of the file, right? Unless and until you got to transfer it. Otherwise, it's all taken granted. We have storage, right? So again, the processing have scaled up to a level where what all information we have today, we can actually get it processed. We don't need a specialized software or a specialized hardware. It's all like commodity hardware which is available today, which could process like any volume of information. And these two actually have paved way for the AI to become relevant or a reality now. Theoretically, the concepts of AI or how to process, how to come up with AI-enabled systems were there, but the blocking factor was the kind of processing speed and the storage, information storage, which was still like a costly affair, right? So the improvement in these two actually made it like a reality now. So with that, I'll just move on explaining the von Neumann model of computers, right? Probably earlier generation, when they start like any computer course, whether it's for weeks or for like professional courses, they always start with this definition, which is Computer is the electronic device which process data to give information as per predefined rules, or these rules are also called as programs, right? And we are all like familiar with. With AI, this definition kind of slightly, that definition remains the same. Instead of we giving the rules or we supplying the rules to the computer, we could also look at the past input and output. Past input output need not be from a computed system. It could be like the happenings what we have captured from the past, right? The past info, and then look through those past info and then come up with what connects the input and output, right? Say for example, like we collect, there are systems which collect like weather data. It goes back in time, and then the date, time, the pressure, the atmospheric pressure, temperature, wind speed, all of these parameters are collected, and then the weather is predicted, right? So for predicting the weather, they leverage a lot of past historical data. So what I'm trying to say here is, looking at the historical data which connects the input and output, go through the historical data and come up with correlations between the input and output. Those correlations form the rules, and these rules could actually be used to predict what is going to happen tomorrow for a new input. We'll just see the same thing in a little more elaborate way. Here on the screen you see a tabular representation of some data. What it has is it is some data collected about orchid flowers, right? Sepal and the petal. Sepal is, if you have learned biology, you would know what a sepal is. It is what beneath the petal of a flower, right? So in an orchid, that would also look beautiful, right? So sepals, and the sepal length and sepal width are measured, and petal length and petal widths are measured, and then the species. What species? So in this case, we have actually considered around 3 or 4 different varieties of orchid, and we have taken those orchids and tried to measure the sepal length, sepal width, the petal length, and the petal width, right? And say for these 4 combinations, this is the specific species, right? So what's the approach? How can I learn if I have this kind of data, which probably runs to pages? What's the approach which I can actually take in order to find the correlation between the input and the output? What it means is, if I get 4 values, 4 new values of sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width, will I be able to predict what is the type of orchid, right? For that, for my reference, or for me to come up with that correlation, I would have the historical data, right? And what approaches could we employ? And one of the key approaches what we could employ here is the statistical methods, right? Statistically, there are different approaches. We'll see like one of the statistical method little more in detail in our next slide. But there are different approaches in statistics and mathematics which could be applied to see how the input is connected to output within my historical data. And once that statistical method is applied, the result could be probably an equation connecting the input and the output, right? It could be of a form y equals mx plus c, or anything. Y is my output, and like some equation on the right hand side. Once I fill in all the values for those variables, and solve the equation, I get the prediction out, right? So the approach is, look at the historical data, approach it with a mathematical or a statistical background, try to correlate how the input and outputs are related, and then with that, come up with an equation which connects the input and output. And in the world of world of artificial intelligence or machine learning in specific, we call that equation as a mathematical model or a model. Whenever you hear that word model, training the model is nothing but like this process which I just explained, right? Just coming up with the mathematical or statistical equation which connects these two. Few terms, the inputs here are called features. I just wanted to introduce the terminologies in AI. If you cannot remember that, it is fine. And the target is the output. It's a different term which is just used in this field. Other than that, it's same input and output. And the output could have, if it is very finite output, in this case, in this example, we are predicting which category or which type of flower it is. These are called labels, right? It's finite output. This I'm just getting into the mathematical side. Very simple, the simplest model which I could have. The left-hand side, you could actually see some historical data. Let's say, it is input is our revenue, like for probably our past few months, and the output is like a measure of our like profit, right? And if I have just the historical data, right, the left-hand side table, one approach could be just plot it on a graph and see like, whether over the months have I improved, right? It's a process what we mostly do in our organizations, right? And in this case, whenever I have plotted my input on x-axis and output on y-axis, this is exactly what I have got. And if you look at the data, it forms almost a straight line, right? There are like one or two guys like which are outside those, but otherwise, it is almost like if I connect the dots, it becomes almost a straight line. In this case, that straight line, the equation for that straight line is my model, right? And if I come up with that equation here, in this case, it is y equals 4x plus 2. That equation is nothing but my model, right? And once I have the model in place, then I could just use any input. I just replace the value of x, and then the y indicates my output, right? This is the simplest of all possible models, mathematical models which we could. In reality, it will not be just one variable. It could be like multiple variables. It could be 100 variables, 200 variables, 1,000 variables, right? And then, coming up with like, how they are correlated. I'll just take a moment to explain this. What yield as a model could be a polynomial of varied degrees, polynomial of 1, polynomial of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. What it means is the graph which comes out of a polynomial 9 could be seen as like the graph which is going up and down. Just to remember this, right? A very good application of say polynomial n, polynomial 4. Application of that could be like in few houses they put this column, right, in front of the house early morning, like with the rice flour they put the column, right? The designs which this column follows are typically a nth degree polynomial, right? So what it means is a lot of or most of the business problems, to some extent, we will be able to represent it with a mathematical or a statistical equation. Probably, it will be a very complex equation, but again, like with the increased computational capacity and the storage capacity, we should be able to like deal or process most of that, like to come up with inferences. So the one which I've shown is the most simplest linear regression. It is not just that, there are like a host of approaches in the regression itself, right? The approach which we said, like linear regression, logistic regression, polynomial regression, so on and so forth. Not just that, there are even other approaches within the domain, like principal component analysis, which looks at like probably, I'll just take a moment to explain like this kind of data, whether petal width has got any implication in this. Does it have any bearing to predict the outcome? So just to find like which all are important. So for that, like there are approaches like PCA and stuff like the principal component analysis. It's like finding which are the relevant inputs which I need to consider for my output. And then many times, if I try to like use all of my data to predict or create my model might go wrong. So again, in this, if you look at the dots are like my historical data, and then the blue line, the light blue line is the prediction. So if I go with the polynomial degree 1, it is going to be wrong, because the first graph, right? The dark blue line is the actual trend, right? The actual way my model has to function. So if I come up with the very simple way to look at it, my predictions can be wrong, right? The second one is the most appropriate one, because I have a equation which is almost can go along with my data points. The third one, I've complicated it too much, like going for a very complex equation. But that complex equation, it's not going to yield me a very, very good result, right? So what it means is, if I have a lot of historical data, just using that historical data and just blindly applying a mathematical equation on that may not solve my problem, or will not solve my problem. Instead, it will actually complicate, and it is going to yield a bad model. So obviously, I need to apply my business knowledge and understanding in order to find like whether my model is almost like realistic, right? And one approach, what is taken is, if I have like a lot of historical events, one approach is the historical data, chop it into say like 10 different pieces and come up with 10 different models instead of having just one model, right? I have like 10 years data, so take like chop it into 12 pieces, Jan data, Feb data, March data, right? Or like take the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and then come up with the model for each and every year and look at it, whether it use all these 12 models to predict, and see like which all models are, or do I have the results from majority models, right? So again, the key message I want to give is, it's not like about the perfection, it is applying your business knowledge onto the problem domain. Just a quick break. Can all of these business problems or the domain problems, can it be represented by a statistical or a mathematical model? There is a famous dialogue in a Malayalam movie which says like, the Bhugolathinte Spandanam Kanakkilana. Hope you would have all heard that, right? Is it true? We have like 24 hours a day, different seasons, but if you look at like a particular hour, most of the time like the weather prediction agency goes wrong. Why? If it is all like mathematics, then it could have been like very, very simple piece of cake, right? The answer is no, it is not. Even though there is a macro level correlation with mathematics or statistics, it is not always like to that minute degree. There is always like a small variance. So there is one other approach which is taken, And one other field where this kind of statistical modeling which is used a lot is the medical field, right? The field of medicine. They use statistics to say, like, whether 100 milligram of crossin will do the job for you, or like, you need like a 150 milligram. It's all like based on statistics. They would have tried it on like first on animals and then probably on a set of human beings, and then based on that data is like what they prescribe, what the doctors prescribe. Again, your blood sugar level, cholesterol level, all of these normals are set based on like statistics. Just have that the back of your mind, because again, once we discuss about this a different way of like looking at it, we might have to like see what is the implication of that on even the medical field, how it is going to disrupt the medical field. This is a depiction of our human brain, like our human brain. So I'm going to talk about a different approach other than the mathematical and statistical approach to deal with my historical data, looking how to find the correlation between the input and the output. So this is a depiction of our human brain. The human brain, you would all be knowing, like it's a network of neurons, right? And if you look at an individual neuron, would look something like this. The neuron, the intelligence of a single neuron is very, 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 very minute. So what scientists, the computer scientists, have tried to do is replicate that kind of model, right? Replicate like how our human neural network function. And then, they have come up with this concept of artificial neuron. So we'll take a deeper look at like how an artificial neuron would look like. It would have inputs. The key here is the function what an artificial neuron is associated. When I say the function, you can actually correlate it back to the model what we explained, right? From the mathematical correlation between the input and output. That's a function, right? The same kind of function we can associate with like whatever our brain neuron also has, but this function is very minimal and very basic. It can actually see if the value is like greater than something, true or false. That's all. It's very, 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 very minute function. It will have a lot of inputs. Based on lot of different inputs, it will actually come up with one output. And this is just one neurons. What they do is they go with a set of or a network of neurons. So any input what they have, right, is actually fed through a network of such neurons, and this is called a neural network, right? And it goes through different layers. One of the vertical one single colored like x1, x2, x3 is like one layer, right? And there is an output layer, and there are two other layers in this particular diagram. So inputs are taken and goes through. Input of first layer is fed to the second layer, input for the second layer. And the output of second layer is fed as the input of third layer, and so on and so forth, right? And finally we will have the output. And here when we saw the neurons, we saw the weights. And the weights can keep varying, right? So the arrows, the complex arrows between these three is the weights. And the weights is where the whole intelligence is. And this is the input, this is the output layer, and these are called the hidden layer. And how it is used is, first they come up with a network with all arbitrary weights and random random weights. And then they kind of take one of the historical data and give that historical data to this particular neural network and see like what this neural network is outputting. And based on that output, and we already have what has happened, we just look at like what is the difference between that and try to adjust the weights within this. And the weights decide, and modifying the weights, we kind of come up with fine tuning this model further and further. To summarize, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the deep learning. Deep learning is any neural network with one or more hidden layers is called a deep learning network. And using that, the difference here is when we use a machine learning, we tend to get an accuracy of around 60 to 70 to maximum 75%, whereas the deep learning networks yield an accuracy of 95 to 95 plus accuracy, right? And these are few accelerators which are there. In the interest of time, I'm just quickly going through this. There's a new field called quantum computing, which is capable of training this kind of models. And then there are specialized chips, processors called GPGPU or TPU from Google, which is able to leverage or train the model. There are other set of computers called neuromorphic computers, which imitates the human brain. That's also there. All of these are going to accelerate, and these are few of the fields which are going to disrupt. I'll end my session with the focus on the robotics or the bearing of AI, which is how AI is relevant in the field of robotics. And on the screen, the right-hand side bottom, you can actually see a robotic arm. That robotic arm is called Da Vinci. That's a surgical robot. It's not a thing of future. The surgical robot is there in Aster MedCity. Aster MedCity has got one such robot, and a lot of surgeries in Aster happens with that particular robot. To summarize, it is a reality now. AI, especially weak AI, is a reality now. With that, I close my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jayakrishnan, request you to please start your session.
Good morning, all of you. Good morning. So I hope this will be interesting because I'm going to touch the controversial aspect of robotics when combined to AI. And before that, thanks a lot to KMA for inviting me here. If KMA invites me next time, most probably I won't come. Don't get surprised. Instead of me, I will send my robot. I'll surely come. I'll sit there. I'll sit there, and possibly my robot will speak for me. And if she makes any mistake, I will press the kill button, the emergency stop button. And the next time, maybe if I do that, the robot may not be interested in myself doing that. She may hit my kill button. Who knows? So actually, the interesting scenario is that now we are at 2018. So you can see this graph. You can see a black spot, right? A black spot. So that is 2023, when we believe that the singularity may happen. The artificial intelligence, by the way, I have to tell that without artificial intelligence, robot is just a piece of iron. So I cannot talk without artificial intelligence touching, but he is having more expertise in that. I'm not directly connected with the technical aspects. So you have already covered extensively some of the basic aspects. So I'm not getting into that. So we'll come back to this slide. The singularity happens at 2023 when the computational capabilities meets the human capabilities. We'll come to this. I'll rush through the slides because time is running. I have to talk about the last slide, more extensively. So let's see how we human beings are learning things and the machines learning things. It's very, very close by. Like if you look at how a baby is born and then started learning things, you can see then left-hand side, the grasping. You might have seen that baby is grasping many things, right? When we, when we visit, when a newborn baby, we will take many things of different shapes. It's available in the market so that he can learn grasping by gripping it. He has an adaptive gripper in the form of fingers. So exactly the same fashion, the robot also learns how to grasp things. And one more example I can cite is the walking. You know how the baby walks. He falls down many times and then he learns how to walk. So he has a dexterous leg, a pair of dexterous legs, which has ability to change the placement of feet in various ways. So the feet placement is one fundamental thing where you get the static balancing, which means that if a line connects two feet, the CG, the center of gravity of the body, should be there. That's a very fundamental understanding. But the baby takes a long time to learn this. So exactly the machines as well. So if I just summarize what makes it possible to emulate human beings, it is very clear that there are three fundamental things. One is the mechanics. And when I say mechanics, obviously there is something else like material science also is there, because that is what you can see the change happens nowadays in the form of various materials, like lightweight is still strong. So we use some of the materials like titanium we use, and space grade alloys like aluminum 6062 5051 alloys we use, which is strong but lightweight. And Kevlar, carbon fiber, state-of-the-art, materials, and then machining capabilities. When I started working with robotics 2005 here in Kalamesheri, I was finding difficult to get the spare parts or the parts machined with 5 microns accuracy, because there are a lot of machine shops out here. And if we approach them and tell them that I need this part at 10 microns accuracy or 5 microns accuracy, we are not getting it at 10 microns accuracy. If we push them, they will tell that go and find somebody else because they have a lot of work. So this takes a lot of accurate machining, but nowadays it is available. Even 3D printers has got fairly good accuracy. So that is there. And next is the sensor perception. So just like us, I can see a lot of people sitting here, and if a robot is standing here, he or she will also be, or it will see the same thing. Again, I'm getting into that in a later slide, whether it is he or she or it. So what happens is that there will be a lot of sensors in tandem collecting this data, and that is called sensor perception. And then AI. I'm not touching AI again. So let's look at the mechanics part of it. If we are trying to emulate a human being, you can see how complex our mechanics is. We have around 244 motors or actuators in the form of muscles sitting in our skeletal system, which is around 230 joints. So I'll tell you an example. The robot that we make now, it was here for the future event. It is called Saya. We just renamed Isra as Saya. Saya means your shadow, your companion. So it has got only 22 motors. So look at that, the difference between an actual human system and the kind of robot. Even though there are a lot of robots which has got more than 50 or 100 motors sitting in various research laboratories across the world. But there's a lot of things that a lot of advancement in terms of mechanics has to happen to reach to that level. And then about another important term I want to introduce is the compliance. So when I stepped into this room, this hall, many people approached me and I shook hand with them. It is highly impractical to shake hand with a robot because either the robot will get damaged or you will get damaged. So when I was bringing this robot for the future event, a lot of people, it was saying always, if someone steps in front, it says a hi with the right hand. So somebody was trying to shake hand with it. I told, no. Then we thought of pasting, don't touch the robot, because the robot may get damaged. So why it happens is because when we exert force in the form of muscular movements, it comes not directly to the joint or the point of actuation. It is coming through various passive elements, just like elastic elements, spring, dampers, like that. So it's not directly driven. So which means that when you apply a torque, if zero torque is like this, and if this is the required torque, it is not like this. It's a compliant way to apply that, just like a trapezoidal or capacitor charging curve. So it is very smooth in the beginning, and towards the end it is very smooth. To achieve that, you need to have this compliance. So When you work with humanoid robots, you may have to use this series elastic. That's a typical terminology, wherein the force is applied through passive elements, but the computation becomes complex. So this is, again, I'm going to touch base with the comparison between robot and human beings, but when you think about the existence, the life, one of the fundamental properties is the replication, the reproduction. So if you think of such kind of reproduction, you may need to have, you may have to go to the fundamentals, just like we have cells in our body. So we need to have a fundamental thing which can be replicated and maybe maintained, repaired from a pool or something, where a robot is also like human beings. We'll come to that. So let's say we have a very dexterous system made, just like human beings. But to work with that, before we get into the AI aspect, we need to have the basic aspects of robotics, which is called kinematics and dynamics. I'll try to explain. Kinematics is nothing but you have connected joints. That is how the body is, both for the robot and the human beings. So if you have, let's say I want to do a pick and place action by moving this bottle from here to here, all these joints of the arms should work in tandem. So there are two kinematics. One is forward kinematics, other one is inverse kinematics. The forward kinematics says that if all these joints are at a particular angle, all these are like joints as rotary joints, articulated joints. So at some particular angle, where exactly the end effector is, the end point is. So that is forward kinematics. But for controlling a robot, what you need is that you are living in the Cartesian world, x, y, z, length, breadth, width, or the Euclidean space where the real life is happening. So you have a problem. This pick and place is there. So you have the coordinates, the relative coordinates of where this bottle is sitting right now and where this bottle is sitting later point in time. So you are feeding that to the robot and to the control system and getting the joint values back. And these joint values are simultaneously fed to all motors. That is what is called the inverse kinematics. Given the end effector coordinate and get the coordinates back in terms of the joint values. So in simple terms. So now, as I told you, we are a hyper-dexterous system wherein we can do one thing in many ways. Again, taking the example of moving this bottle, I can move this bottle in various ways. There are a lot of possibilities of doing the same action, same task. So how to optimize, how to get the best way of doing that, that is what is called optimization. So if optimization is not there, we cannot arrive upon a single solution. There will be multiple solutions. So for that, there are a lot of optimization terminology. I'll just talk about one of the optimization which is there in the picture. You can see a person is carrying a heavy suitcase. That is potential energy minimization. When you carry a bucket full of water or a heavy suitcase, you will not carry like this, right? Will you carry like this? It is not possible, or it will hurt you badly. So this is one optimization where the system tries to minimize the potential energy. So just like which you have seen from Viju's slides, this is also a polynomial, a secondary minimization differential equation, which applies to the solution, multiple solution, and arrive upon single solution. This is in simplest way we can tell like that. There's a lot of optimization. I'm not getting into that. And now coming to the perception. Perception, the right hand side you can see the Google car, which is equipped with a lot of sensors, LIDAR, then proximity sensors, camera, GPS, everything. So just like in the robot, is exactly like a robot only. We have a lot of sensors to gather the information from the environment, and we fuse that. We don't just use one sensor. And there also we apply AI to identify which is the best solution. Navigation is working like that. So in the vision, in the navigation, in the grasping, in the walking, everywhere this AI can be applied to identify which is the best solution, and from the previous knowledge as well. So that is what is called sensor fusion. We also do sensor fusion. And one thing I just want to point to you here is on the left-hand side, you can see all the 5 sensory organs. One is missing. We actually have 6. I don't know why cochlear fluid we are not considering. It speaks about the balance. So the perception and cognition is in robot and human beings are almost the same. Like, we perceive and then we understand and we deduce, we come out with a solution, and then we respond back to the environment, and that's how it is. And then we keep on learning things. So now, this is the most important slide. Let me compare how the human intelligence and the artificial intelligence or the robot intelligence is about. So one of the main characteristics of the life, even if it is a microorganism, is to be self-organizing, self-evolving. So we are all born like that. If you look at the robots also, that's what I was talking about the other slide. We have to go to the fundamentals. We are all born as single cell, right? When fertilization happens, 200 million sperms are running towards the egg to get fertilized. And we are all winners. All people sitting here are winners. The one was successfully able to fertilize with the egg, which again is a single cell. So now this single cell takes 50 replications, multiplication, which becomes 100 trillion cells in a human body. When the baby is born, roughly 100 to 130 trillion cells it is. So this 100 trillion cells, if you look at, this is a framework. This is the hardware framework. Let's say this is the hardware framework. So let's say we have robots also, which can multiply like this, or taking this fundamental building blocks from a pool and then creating a shape. So now if you look at the behavior, the personality, that is the next thing, the personality. So we are all having a personality, different personalities. When a baby is born, in fact, it is an open book. There is no personality for the, what is the personality of a newborn baby? There is no personality. That is only instinct. So when I say instinct, when a baby is born, it goes to the mother's breast and takes milk, get fed. So that aspect is the instinct. When a plant is growing, if you just obstruct the sunlight, it will take a different path. It is instinct. I was told by one of the surgeons in Srijitra that our spinal cord has a local intelligence. When an accident happens, even though the leg is broken, we will try to stand upright, vertical. So that's a local intelligence. So there are a lot of our digestion, our the respiratory actions, and then the cardiac actions like the heartbeat and things like that. The blood circulation. There are a lot of things which is involuntary, which is instinct, part of an instinct. So baby only has got this instinct. There is no intelligence. So intelligence is developed over a period of, let's say, the first 7 years is very crucial. So what happens is that if you take a baby, you have 23K chromosomes or genomes from your parents. And in fact, the baby is having 2.2 billion bacterial genomes. So we are more of bacteria than human beings. So when what happens is that when the baby is growing, these two things interact. Like he is reading and he is being condoled by the parents, and then he is actually watching stuff, and then interacting all the possible way with the environment and the other people around him. So these two bacterial genome, 2.2 billion bacterial genome and 23K human genomes interacts and forms a layer called epigenome. So this is scientifically proved. A lot of people are working on this in outside India. So if you take a genome mapping, you can more or less understand a person's behavior. So what I'm trying to tell is that look at the combination, possible combination for a human being to evolve into a personality. That is the reason when twins are born, one is brought up in one place, other is brought up in different place. They are completely different. So this exactly can be replicated by AI. AI is possible to replicate a personality. So what is next? So next is like, artificial intuition. I don't know if this term is wrong. Viju has to correct me if it is. So because intuition is the imagination. There is a typical difference between the logical thought process and the intuition. You know that if you look at our brain, it can be easily divided into 4. The backside is the perception where we sense all these things, and front side is the frontal side is the cognition happens where we deduce things. And so the right half is the creative side, intuition takes place there. The left half is the logical side. So I was just looking through various articles and various studies. And then what is happening in our society, what I understood is that if you look at, that now even medical doctors, they use a lot of equipments for diagnosis. And a lot of, methodologies, even including AI. You can detect cancer well in advance. You can see what is going to happen in future if you are going to have Alzheimer's with the help of AI, looking at the pattern. So of each cell, the neurons. So what I am telling is that there is a lot of advancement which makes it possible for us to understand, predict the thing. But basically, when it comes to the actual findings, you can very well understand that in olden days we have 3,000 years of history. India has. And just like in Greece and other places, people sitting there simply understood many things, the trajectory of the celestial bodies and various other things, just with the help of intuition. So I feel like there is a drift from the left-hand side of the brain to the right-hand side. The right-hand side of the brain to the left-hand side, which means that we started thinking very much logically. Now, I also use calculators. I don't compute by mind. I don't do calculation by mind. My daughter is not doing that. So what I'm telling, there is a drift. So we started seeing things logically. Now, to intuition to happen, what you have to do is that you should have a replica of artificial intuition, or maybe you have to replicate that. I don't know how that is possible. I will come to emotion, then you will try to I will try to explain how that is possible. So that also is kind of very complex for an AI system to replicate. So one more thing about creativity. I already told the right-hand side of the brain is creativity. Creativity is not actually randomness. Recently, I read that an AI program was able to compose a music. So music, as you know, 7 notes and then various possibilities as far as the Carnatic music is concerned. So there is a possibility that it was not there already. It has invented a new raga or maybe new composition, which is actually a randomness. If you look at the world is full of examples. The world is a superset. We are not ideally making any invention. We are going there and finding out this is there. You are the first person to understand that. So what I'm telling is that if randomness is considered as creativity, it is not that. The reason is because when a creativity happens, not only the people who are looking at the creativity enjoys, the person who created also started enjoying. So that's an inner experience. So that's what I'm actually going to miss when we try to replicate with the help of artificial intelligence. And the last thing is consciousness. So this was a big question, whether consciousness can be there for robots. So I already told you, in the singularity, if you look at, people are telling that, those who are completely into this computer science and believing in that, they consider information processing as intelligence, and they say that if the computational capacity reaches 10 power 16, then definitely the computer or the robot will have intelligence, the consciousness. Why it is? Because there are 100 billion cells, neurons in the brain, which is connected to around 1,000 other neurons through synapses and firing at a rate of 100 hertz. which gives you around 10 power 15 or 16. So if you reach that level, you can have consciousness. But the actual thing is that if you just divide it further, you can see neurons are not simple intelligence. Neurons are complex. That is why microorganisms like paramecium and all are able to search for food and then reproduce, things like that. So that the reason is because neurons are made out of proteins called microtubules, which has, again, if you look at the microtubules, it has again fundamental particles at a rate of 10 power 9. And then they communicate at the rate of 10 hertz. So which means that you have to reach 10 power 27 to replicate human consciousness if at all it is possible. But the consciousness is not happening in that space, in the time-space world where we live in. Consciousness is happening in the timeless energy world. I will just show you one more slide. Then I will try to explain. I'm just skipping this. This is a very famous Schrodinger's cat experiment. The cat is everywhere. If you look at computer science, cat is everywhere for vision and all sort of things. So this is a typical example. The idea is like this was a thought experiment done by Schrodinger. You know, we talk about molecules, we talk about atoms, but when you get into further into it, you can see there are subatomic particles like electrons, protons, neutrons. These are all not exactly behaving based on the, what is it like the classical mechanics or physics. It does not obey all this. One particle can be superpositioned on the top of another particle. So because of this, that aspect, there is a whole lot of uncertainty, a probability. This experiment says that a cat is kept in a box, and there is a vial of poison, and there is one radioactive atom sitting there. And when the radioactive atom is disintegrate, there is a Geiger counter which is connected to a hammer. The hammer hits this poison vial, and it breaks, and the cat dies. The interesting fact is that this atom to disintegrate, there is no certainty. There is 50% probability, which means that you are not sure whether the cat is died or alive when the box is opened. So that is completely dependent upon your consciousness, because when the moment you open the box, then this particular atom or subatomic particle or the quantum will change the state from one state to another state. So probably when you look at it, only the cat is killed. Only if you open and look at it, the cat is killed. So that kind of uncertainty is there. So that is where when the neurons, or maybe the fundamental element of neurons, the microtubules, switching between one point to other point, in that gap, in that transition, a lot of information happening. That is what is called consciousness. People are trying to understand this. But that's the reason I am telling that to replicate consciousness, it's not a simple thing. It's not even happening in this time-space world. So being a person from this domain working with robotics, I would say human beings cannot be replicated because we are human beings. On the other hand, if we think ourselves as subsidized, maybe when the AI comes into our daily life full-fledged, we may lose jobs. That is also the reason, that is because of our mindset. If we think that I know only this work, I cannot change, I cannot be creative to do something else, then it will be difficult. So that is the only reason. Otherwise, if you only think, and then you can bring in this regulatory aspects like blockchain to control the behavior of AI. It could be possible. Whatsoever it is, what I'm telling you, the consciousness cannot be replicated with the help of AI or robotics. So what I feel is only this. I'm stopping with that. If we are stupid enough, we can be robots. But I don't think robot can ever be human beings. And I would like to hear from you, maybe during the networking session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We would like to present a small memento to both the speakers as a token of our gratitude. For this, may I request Mr. Jose Dominic, Advisory Council member of Kerala Management Association, Chairman of CGH Earth Group of Hotels, to please go on the stage and present the memento. Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting into the keynote address on the subject, Governance in a Disrupted World. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay back in the hall. There is no break now. We are immediately getting into the next session. We have a very illustrious speaker, Mr. APM Mohammad Hanish, IAS, who is already here. So we are going to have the break after this session. Let me give you a very brief introduction about Mr. Mohammad Hanish. He's the Managing Director of Kochi Metro Rail Limited, Chairman and Managing Director of Kerala State Civil Supplies Corporation, or Supplyco as we know it better. He has the additional responsibility as Managing Director, Kochi Smart City. Earlier, he was the Nodal Officer for the recently concluded 2017 FIFA Under-17 World Cup and Director of an Islamic financial services company owned by the government, which has non-resident Indian directors. He served as Managing Director of Chairman Financial Services Limited also. Mr. Mohammad Hanish is an alumnus of College of Engineering, Trivandrum, an IAS officer of the 1996 batch placed in Kerala cadre, and his illustrious 2 decades of public service have seen him occupy key positions, including Ernakulam District Collector, Director of Social Education Development Departments. He has been decorated with innumerable awards and accolades, which include E-Governance Award instituted by Government of Kerala for the initiatives taken in Education Department. He has undergone training programs, including at Toronto, at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, IIM Bangalore, and Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Mr. Mohammad Hanish is very popular here. He's known to be an erudite speaker with an amazing storehouse of facts and figures, and he always delights his audiences with his insightful talk. May I request Mr. C.S. Karta, Honorary Treasurer of Kerala Management Association, to please welcome our keynote speaker and accompany him to the stage. Sir, may we request you to please deliver the keynote address.
I'm straight on to this venue rather than to my absolutely dull and insipid files in my office. So much for the refreshing change that can be brought about as a result of the communion of all those wonderful souls and hearts together. It's indeed a pleasure whenever Kerala Management Association invites me to do such talks on diverse topics of my choice as well as their choice. It is indeed absolutely interesting. After all, that's the way the life is, full of twists and turns, absolutely delicious, at times a bit dull, at times a bit exciting, but at the same time the flow goes on uninterrupted. That's what it's all about. You've been focusing for the past 2 days on this topic of reimagining leadership in a disrupted world. The first and foremost thought which comes to my mind is that whenever we speak about disruptions, as a bureaucrat, well-oiled bureaucrat, absolute dyed-in-the-wool bureaucrat, the first disruption that comes to my mind is the disruption that is made by the lawmakers in the parliament and in the assemblies. I hope it's not the kind of disruption that we are talking about, because that entails a great deal of loss of public money, time, effort, and you know what. It's been happening for years together in the parliament as well as in various state assemblies. At times leading to, the exhibition, the absolute brilliant exhibition of the physical prowess of the lawmakers in terms of really understanding who is the victorious one. No wonder that India does exceedingly well in wrestling in our international championships. Wherever we go, that's why we keep clamoring for the inclusion of, we clamored for the inclusion of wrestling right from those times of independence. And the first bronze medal was won by K.D. Jadhav in the 1952 Olympics in Helsinki, if I'm right. 1952 Olympics in wrestling. Thereafter, for the Asian Games, we kept telling everybody that you should include kabaddi as well for that. After all, it's leg pulling of the finest order. So that's another sort of disruption. So ultimately, in all this kind of commotion that's created by the so-called physical disruptions, there are certain salient things which stand out in terms of what should happen as far as the amassing of the knowledge, the dispersal of the knowledge, and ultimately the dissecting and the kind of delectable exercise that one could do with knowledge is concerned. This is the 21st century, a century in which information is the king. Compared to the 19th century, which had colonization and industrial revolution as the dominant themes, and compared to the 20th century, which had the great wars as well as the liberation of the various colonies, and ultimately the birth of various nations and the growing up of the nations to become absolutely bright stars amongst the community of nations. That was 21st century. Industrial revolution and colonization was the 19th century. And in the case of the 21st century, 18 years on, where do we stand today? That's the question to be answered. We find to our amazement that ever since the 1990s, we saw the demise or the collapse of a dominant philosophy and the breaking or the crashing down of the walls of distrust, walls of enmity, walls of hatred, which were quite symbolized by the demolition of the Berlin Wall in the last few days of 1989. There has been a sea change in terms of the processes that shaped the destiny of the nations as well as the societies. The first and foremost thing is that the way we look at finance, the way we look at the markets, the industry and the commerce changed forever. Liberalization, privatization, globalization have been kind of, hackneyed themes which have been repeated ad nauseum, ad infinitum. I don't want to dwell on it further. At the same time, these were themes which are absolutely Latin and Greek for us, the Indians, before 1990s. This is for sure. And this landmark budget of 1991 by Dr. Manmohan Singh changed everything for better or for worse. Thereafter, keeping pace with whatever was happening outside this country, in all those Western Hemisphere as well as the Eastern Hemisphere, right from the Far East to Southeast Asia to the South Asia, that's India, to the Middle East, to the Mediterranean, to Africa and Mediterranean, and thereafter to continental Europe and UK, and finally to the North and South Americas. It's been a story that's been repeated ever so many times with absolutely different hues and shades. The way the countries developed, the way institutions grew, the way societies blossomed are all to be studied. And ultimately, the time frame for us to understand that would be something between 1992 and 2017 December or 2018 March. Exactly 25 years into it. Why do I stick on to this time frame of 25 years? Just put on your memory caps or put on your memory cells, activate your memory cells and think about when we had the advent of the mobile telephones and the internet. Wasn't it in the 1990s? It was. Internet was introduced, if I'm correct, in 1994? 94. And mobile phones also made its entry into India almost at the same time, say by 1995, 1996, when we had the huge sets with everybody, and people used to feel proud about the fact that the fatter the set, the greater the inflated ego of the person. Those were the times when Escotel and everybody had that huge sets with you, and you used to carry it as if it's a kind of a radio set with you. And you would always hold it high as well. You never held it down. That was the kind of difference between the sets of the past and the sets of today. Along with it, companies began to change, institutions began to change. How did companies change? How did institutions change? Were they managed by the same set of professionals in the same hierarchical order? Or were they managed by a different set of professionals, totally wedded to different philosophies, and did not really go in the hierarchical manner, but ultimately went for the lateral, the lateral functioning, or the lateral, the de Bono theory and whatever, the lateral functioning that was created. Now there is something interesting to it. Be it the government, be it the private sector, things were changing. Privatization began to happen in such core areas of infrastructure like the ports, the airports, telecom, power, roads, highways, and so on and so forth. In certain areas, the advent of privatization and the restructuring process was very fast enough because it did not entail the acquisition of land. For instance, telecom was such a sector which did not require any such land for the advancement. But in the case of the highways, the National Highways Authority of India found it very difficult right from the beginning to acquire more and more land, and it became all the more acute in states such as Kerala, where the population density is the highest. Now coming on to the companies, what happened to the companies altogether? Companies began to become leaner and meaner. In a leaner, meaner company, what were the things that happened? The staff became trimmed. The focus of every professional began to be absolutely specified, job specific, task specific. And the huge structures were broken down into small cells of activity. This started off in the case of the IT companies, and it spread on to other companies as well. Task forces were created. Quality circles were created based on the Japanese concept of Kaizen and others. And finally, it all ultimately began to, create enormous, different, varied centers of knowledge and activity. The summation and the sum total of these quality circles and quality aspects, the small task forces together, added on to the strength of the company and finally created the summary of the prospects of the company, the kind of wonderful prospects that were created by this company. So from 1990s, 92, 93, 94 onwards, towards this 2018, these were the things that were happening in established companies around the globe. Companies began to get trimmer. As I said, quality circles were formed. And there was a greater focus on deliverance within time limits. That was most important. From the governmental circle, when I come from the governmental circle, I can definitely laugh to myself as well as, laugh along with you when I state that the great 5-year plans that we created for ourselves right from the time of independence happens to be continuing in theory, more in theory than in practice. Many a time we have the first 5-year plan activity going on till the 5th 5-year plan. Several irrigation projects which began in the 1950s and the 1960s are still to be completed, and the Ayacut area that needs to be irrigated gets trimmer and trimmer. Why is it so? A project which was supposed to have an outlay of something like 50 or 60 crores in the 1960s today would require something close to 1,200 crores to be completed. And at what value? What's the value addition that's created to the society as well as to the nation? These were questions which were being pondered about. Then there was this question of what size should the government be and what would be the size of the private sector. What are the areas in which government should operate and which are those areas wherein it should just do the regulation and leave the whole activity to the market forces to do. That was a kind of a defining moment for this nation as well as this world. Many nations around the world, many governing entities around the world decided to go in for the regulating structure. Strict regulators, level playing fields are created, but ultimately it's a synergy of the forces. It's the kind of interplay of various market forces that will finally determine as to how energetic and robust the marketplace could be. That was interesting. Based on that interplay, the prosperity of the nation came to be indexed, came to be calculated. The growth rate happened to be the net result of all those market forces that intervened in those particular sectors of the economy and did their work in the most constructive manner. It required greater challenge for the private sector, a greater risk for the private sector, because ultimately you were answerable to the society at large. Gone were the days when the protectionist tariffs and the protectionist regimes used to dictate what exactly is to be produced. Whatever iron you produce, whatever steel you produce, whatever material you produce, that would be definitely consumed by the domestic market, and the protectionist tariff would certainly ensure that nobody else enters the market from outside. Gone are those days. Today, when these Chinese products flood the market, there is a great deal of consternation amongst the domestic producers. It's correct. There is a question involved in it. What is the price of quality, and what is the premium that's to be placed on the price of that particular product? These are things which have to be examined in detail. But at the same time, let us understand something very clearly. The axiom is that consumer is the king. The late Dhirubhai Ambani used to always tell his dear sons, Mukesh and Anil, that tomorrow if you begin to ignore detail, and if you begin to ignore the customer, leave alone the customer, if you begin to ignore the detail, you will definitely perish. Detail is the king. When detail becomes the king, let us look at the kind of the management structure that should come into being in this post-modernized world, in this 21st century world that exists in the 21st century, to understand the subtleties and the nuances of the marketplace. Very interesting. Suddenly a wind of change can blow over. A product can become redundant in just 6 months' time. Especially so in the new areas, the new generation, the new technology arenas like information technology and artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. When the particular, take for instance those brilliant contraptions, brilliant devices that have come about in the sector of medical sciences and technology. Every equipment that's produced by the hospitals just becomes redundant after 3 years of its utility, and there is not even scrap value for that. Now, in such a situation, when people, products, materials, and mechanisms and systems get outdated at a blinding speed, how do we go about the task of redefining ourselves, creating resurgent ideas about ourselves, and trying to reinvent ourselves on a year-to-year, month-to-month basis? The world is fast changing. The world is fast unfolding in terms of the kind of diversities. Let me look at what the governance structure of this country has been doing in this absolutely disrupted world. First and foremost, there have been governments in this world which have brought about certain ministries. Very interestingly and lovely definitions have been made, like the Ministry for Happiness. Ministry for Happiness has come about, started off for the tiny Himalayan kingdom. Hats off to Bhutan for that. They computed gross national happiness on the basis of the 33 parameters, and ultimately the National Planning Commission very clearly defined it. With the limited intellectual resources that they had, the physical resources that they had, they showed the way for the world. United Arab Emirates followed suit, and they are being followed by several other nations. Now, we have ever so many governments that have brought about ministries or departments that deal with innovations, out-of-the-box thinking, and new ideas. There are several countries in this world which have created departments to create or think tanks for new ideas to come in. India, for one, has not really gone into that extent. At the same time, we have been dwelling very much upon this task or the theme of skill development as well as innovation for quite some time. It's just that the innovative practices get spread across a kind of mix of players altogether. One, the government; two, the NGOs; three, the think tanks; four, the able-bodied thinking citizens of the country; five, the academic institutions; and six, all those readers who write to the editors in the newspaper columns. All this put together, innovations have been coming about. But there is a great value as well as a kind of a disservice that the innovations create. The great value is that in a disrupted world like this, where intellectual disruption or constructive disruption becomes the order of the day, we always have to have people who think beyond these set practices, theories, and shibboleths. That has to be done. The flip side is that whenever you go in for these innovative practices or new ideas, most often we find that there has been a discounting in terms of the understanding of what this innovation or what this contraption would ultimately mean to the society in economic and social terms. The financial cost of this innovation and the utilitarian aspect of this innovation is not exactly captured. So it leads us to a very interesting question. Thomas Alva Edison, the magician of the Menlo Park in United States of America, the most prolific inventor that this world had seen, with something like 100 patents, remarked to himself, if my invention, if whatever little things that I invent are of no utility to the society, then better let me be doomed. That was what he had to state. In similar vein, when you look at it, ever so many startups are coming over. When startups come over, it becomes the bounden duty, or rather the pledge of the governments of the day, to see to it that such startups, such turnaround companies, such small ideas are definitely ignited, triggered, and ultimately protected in a safe, enabling environment. What can government provide? Karnataka government can provide Bangalore and the technoparks and all those places, Sarjapur and all those places wherein you would have good electricity, good water supply. God Lord knows what kind of road conditions exist in Bangalore nowadays. God save them. But then of course that metro is there, like whatever we try to do in Cochin as well. And finally, but there is a question here. How can a government intervene in that particular R&D place wherein ultimately it is the innovator, it is the person who decided to go for the startup, who does the ingenious things, whose brilliant sparks from the brain creates extraordinary ventures. But ultimately, to test that particular innovation in a marketplace would require test firing of the whole thing. And for that, you need a market or a pilot scheme to be there. How much of finance is required for such setups, for such startups to be really brought into the marketplace? That's the biggest challenge. Today, after ever so many misadventures, the banking sector has become absolutely conservative. Many of you industrialists would definitely agree to it. When it comes to spending, on the capital front, spending on the productive or the industrial front, several eyebrows would be raised by the bank manager before he settles down for advancement of any kind of bank loan to the entrepreneur / the innovator / the industrialist. This being the fact, when the capital inflow into the productive sectors of the economy happens to be a trickle, then how can we expect, startups to get invigorated? That's wherein government needs to create a corpus for itself, corpus for the specific purpose, and see to it that definitive seed capital is provided. Of course, certain things are happening in this manner. From a government perspective, I have seen during the last 20 years the way the government system has been performing, with people from the lower division clerk to UD clerk to superintendents to undersecretaries to deputy secretaries and so on and so forth. Whatever happens to this nation, whatever change blows across, I am absolutely undeterred by it and absolutely unaffected by it, would be the set, style and the set, the notion of any government employee. That being the case, how do you change him? And how can governance take a turn for the better? That's wherein the system-driven processes need to be introduced. Today, we are trying to bring in as much of, online practices as possible. We are trying to make it as much of system-driven as possible. But very interesting things are happening around us. I was the Secretary Urban Affairs for almost 2.5 years in the state of Kerala. And we tried to make the whole process of the submission of the building plan applications online. We created the Sangeetham software and asked all my colleagues in all these corporations and municipalities, absolutely corruption-ridden dens, to go in for the online. Do you know what they did? After 15 days, they realized that the power is ultimately going to slip away from their hands as far as the sanctioning of the building permit is concerned. So they began to convince me, stating that, sir, the sanctioning of building permit is a sacrosanct activity. It's a sacred activity which should be touched by the human hand. touching of the human hand in both our ways, greasing of the palms is the second definition. Now after that, unless and until that is done, the sanctity of the land and the place will never be preserved, sir. I said, nothing doing, let's go on with it. Then came the second revolt, or the second bullet that was blasted from there. They saw to it that finally, even utilizing this online, finally when this whole thing came on, they added a proviso to it stating that the hard copy may also be submitted. So from soft copy to hard copy, it's been a kind of a wonderful journey. This journey happens only in developing nations like that, like India. We need to grow further. This is something of a great challenge. Be it the green window, you know, the kind of, single window clearance system that we have in our industry sector. Be it the kind of clearances which we require for setting up a good world-class school in the education sector. Yeah, I mean, many educationists are here and they know for sure the kind of extraordinary efforts or the kind of absolutely grinding efforts that they have to take to obtain an NOC from the government so that they could go to the CBSE for getting an affiliation. You will never get it. In such a scenario, how does the governance change? How does the governments change? That's wherein, apart from the system-driven policies, a great deal of training and retraining needs to be done at the entry level, the middle level, and the higher level. The unfortunate fact of the life is that it's only for IAS officers or IPS officers that we have this middle level practice and the higher level practice. For instance, in the last 2 days, I was at the National Academy of Administration in Missouri teaching officers of 10-year service and beyond on the wonderful things that are happening around this world, in this country, and also about the challenges that they're going to face. But this kind of a training has eluded the lower structure, or whatever we call as the cutting edge level of administration. We need to introduce that. And thirdly, specialization is the order of the day. In 21st century, one cannot just go along and state that I am the jack of all trades and the master of none. You need to be the master of at least one subject. Unless and until that is done, you would never be able to prosper. That is the third thing. And the fourth thing would be that finally there has to be a greater transparency in terms of the procedure and the sharing of the information between the citizenry and the government. All this put together, finally let's hope for the better and see to it that the startups, the industrial establishments, the commercial establishments, everything flourishes. Ultimately, hope springs eternal from the human breast, as Alexander Pope remarked. And it is this hope that finally creates a new future for all of us. Yesterday's happened to be in the trash bins of history. And today's happened to be absolutely short and very, very precise in terms of the time that we have. But then tomorrow's happen to be brilliant tomorrows, radiant tomorrows, which can certainly create new possibilities in the horizon. That's wherein this country like India and such developing countries have to focus upon. That's wherein we need to exert all our might. Be it the industrial sector, the commercial sector, the agricultural sector, be it the manufacturing sector and the government sector, we need to work hand in hand. Finally, it's a question about honoring those individuals who began thinking beyond their times, much ahead of their times, and tried to create a new meaning to the process of life in our world. And such persons should not be called zany characters. Instead, they need to be honored. And they need to be provided with financial support as well as intellectual support to see to it that finally they would be able to, introduce their products exactly in the marketplace with the kind of permutations and combinations that are required so that that product becomes an economic viability, becomes a viable product, becomes an economic success. That's most important. Very interesting things are coming around this world. Take, for instance, the flood-ravaged, the cyclone-ravaged little country who is our neighbor for quite a long time and for whose independence we had been responsible to a great extent, Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a remarkable turnaround country. With the kind of growth rate and the kind of exports that's being clocked every year by this country of Bangladesh, the entrepreneurship skills, the industrial sector is really on the upswing or the uptick. This is very interesting. How did it happen in spite of all those kind of conflicts, all those kind of riots and rebellions that happen? It is because we did have a focus. We had an abiding commitment, come what may, on the kind of the path of economic progress for that country. If Bangladesh can do it, if Sri Lanka can do it in a wonderful, dainty manner, why can't we do it? We always claim that ours is a huge country with 32 lakh square kilometers and something like 122 crore souls to feed. But that's the challenge. That's be it the food security sector, the literacy, the health, social welfare, irrigation, water supply, sanitation. These little missions of the quality circles have to deliver. Time is of essence. Everybody has 24 hours in a day. A bureaucrat has 24 hours, an industrialist has 24 hours. But unfortunately, in the bureaucratic arena, what we see is that our 24 hours often gets reduced to something like effective 6 hours and most often 7 hours a day. Nothing more than that. When the industrialist and the entrepreneur toils for something like 17 and 18 hours a day. This is the difference. We need to reverse the order. We need to see to it that there is a level playing field as far as work is concerned, and that's wherein these governance structures have to focus. Governments have to become leaner. Governments have to become specific in terms of the tasks and responsibilities. It should not become the responsibility of the government to run airliners, hotels, and such exotic things. It should become the absolute responsibility of the governance to see to it that education, industry, commerce, economics, social sector are taken care of as a strict regulator and also as a benefactor in a strict sense of the term. That's how expenditure of the government could be reduced and expenditure could be made utilized in a much, much better manner. Otherwise, as the saying goes, full many a flower is born to blush unseen and to waste its sweetness on the desert air. Let us not allow all these flowers to blush unseen and to waste its sweetness. Let that not be the fate of this country. Let's see to it that tomorrow becomes an absolutely different tomorrow and a new India is triggered. For that new India to be triggered, management associations, groups of informed entrepreneurs, groups of individuals and industrialists with your own funds, CSR activity plus the kind of activity, industrial activity that you carry on, shall have a rhythm, a focus. Let's strive to create a unified workplace and a work configuration so that at least by 2020 we always claim that we would have the greatest youth force in the world. Let that youth force happen to be a creative youth force which should contribute to the well-being of the nation and not to feed to the rank of the terrorists and the militants of this nation, the robbers of this nation. Let's not allow that to happen. The banking sector has to rise, governance has to rise, and people like you have to rise. And then that beautiful symphony of togetherness is created. That symphony of togetherness would be lovelier than the greatest symphonies that have been created by Beethoven and Johann Sebastian Bach. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak and wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. May we request you to please stay back and accept a small memento from us. May I request Mrs. Meena Vishwanathan, Managing Committee Member and Advisor to Bhavan's Educational Group of Institutions, to please hand over the memento. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a short break now, a break of 20 minutes exactly. Please try to be back in the hall after 15 minutes.